quarter. Happy New Year. We're very glad that you can join us today. CESTA is the Center for Spatial and Textual Analysis. We're the Digital Humanities College. We host a variety of digital humanities projects, robust programs from bachelor and graduate students, and events like today's. Visit cesta.stanford.edu for more information about what we do. I am Orion. I'm the Center Manager at CESTA. And today's talk is titled Strategic Frameworks for Extended Realities. And it's quite like a homecoming event, actually. We're hosting Umar Patel, current AI and policy research developer at the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence at Stanford. And before that, he interned at CESTA 8 times. Umar recently graduated from Stanford with his MS and BS in computer science alongside a BA in archaeology. And through his work, has curated powerful interdisciplinary applications at the cross-section of computer science and digital humanities. Umar has been a part of the CESTA community since the second year of undergraduate studies, working to leverage AI to develop linguistic tools for low-resource languages such as Ottoman Turkish, and expanding Ottoman heritage through immersive digital media such as extended reality. Umar's work in virtual reality spans applications in digital heritage, education, and industry with a focus on user-centered design and immersive 3D engagement. Today, he will talk about how advances in mixed reality technologies like Meta's Orion AR glasses and visionOS are transforming digital humanities, education, and industry. So please give a warm welcome back to Umar, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you guys for coming. First and foremost, Happy New Year to all of you. I hope you're having a wonderful start to the quarter. Yeah, and before I just get started, I just want to first and foremost thank Aaron. Thank you for setting this talk. I'm very excited to speak with you all today. I also want to thank my PhD mentor during the time that I was a part of CESTA, She's not here at the moment, yeah, no, she definitely was the focal point of my first few internships at CESTA, and she really guided me through, the digital humanities and, as Aaron mentioned, some of the low resource language Ottoman Turkish space and how we can implement AI to kind of enhance those experiences. And yeah, no, a lot of projects I've worked on with her, I'd like to thank her. And just overall, the CESTA community, I think, as you'll probably see, my background is definitely interdisciplinary, and I think at Stanford there's no better interdisciplinary place than here. I think there are a lot of amazing projects. Just outside, you could see all of the incredible work students are doing, and in the multidisciplinary space. And I think every time I step in here, it's a reminder that when you're working here, when you're doing projects here, and just speaking with people, yeah, this place really is. A place to be if you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And so, yeah, I just want to start off by saying that. But with that said, yeah, let's get into it. So today, we're going to be discussing some of my work, actually, that I've been kind of working on for over 4 years in virtual reality. And yeah, over that time, I came to basically come up with some frameworks that has helped me develop in a wide range of different disciplines, as Aaron mentioned, from digital humanities, obviously, to education, and obviously industry as well. So yeah, I'd love to share that with you, and yeah, just have a discussion on some of those topics. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So before we get started, I just want to make sure everyone is familiar with the term XR. I don't want to assume everyone knows what that is, but and I'll be using it quite a lot today. So XR is just a blanket term for virtual and augmented reality, as well as any type of immersive reality experience. It could even be in some cases 2D experiences. But yeah, I'll be using that term a lot, so I just wanted to preface with that. Yeah, basically on the agenda today, the first thing I want to kind of motivate our discussion with why are we talking about frameworks? Frameworks, virtual reality. It seems like a little bit boring in a lot of disciplines, I can imagine, but yeah, I just want to kind of preface on how actually, frameworks is a great way of thinking about not just virtual reality, but a lot of different disciplines, and why it's a great motivator for us to start thinking about development strategies. Then I'll go into kind of the main part of the discussion, which is basically the 6 XR frameworks I kind of have been using the last like 4 years to develop my own experiences, and the 6 frameworks I feel is a great starting point for a lot of development in this space. And then, yeah, then we'll get into frameworks as building blocks, and then the future of XR development, given all of this context, and then we'll just wrap up. I will preface, like, honestly, this is very misleading. Like, the first 2 categories are going to take up like a big chunk of time in the last year, like 5 minutes, like, fine. So, yeah. But no, let's get started. Okay. So we live in a world that's increasingly complex, interdisciplinary, and multidimensional. So I think, especially in the field of digital humanities, in the center we are in today, as well as education and in many evolving areas of industry, frameworks may seem a little bit old-fashioned and not very useful for many modern complex applications. It makes sense. However, they can fit, even though they sometimes can give off a negative perception, there might be a little bit of potential to dig deeper here and see why that may be, but also where they can be very helpful. Additionally, you may be thinking that in the context of technology, there are already a ton of frameworks for all sorts of 2D experiences ranging across many disciplines, and you're not wrong. There are many developer frameworks for existing 2D experiences. And here, I mean, you don't have to read these, but as you can imagine, mobile apps, websites, data visualization, or data related tasks, there are programming suites, there are a bunch of frameworks here. There are dozens amongst dozens of development and design frameworks, even not listed here. However, and you may be able to get to the point that there are well-established development frameworks for a lot of these 2D applications, spanning common devices such as laptops, mobile phones, etc. However, for the immersive space, we can't necessarily say the same. Definitive sets of developer frameworks are not yet clearly defined. The space as a whole, in my opinion, is yet to be realized by the larger community of existing and future XR developers. So now I'll get back to what I mean a little bit more about this, about the state of XR development, the developer space, in just a second. But before we delve into that, I want to briefly just motivate this analysis and exploration of development frameworks and its subsequent applications with some brief insights that I've gained through my journey here at Stanford, developing and programming for VR and AR. And yeah, basically, let's get into it. So we'll jump from there all the way to archaeology. Now you might be thinking, well, what's going on? We were talking about XR, we were talking about VR and AR, now we're like looking at these artifacts and archaeology. I heard some of you back there talking about archaeology before, so maybe this might be interesting. But I want to briefly go over kind of my personal academic background and how it's kind of shaped the way I think about frameworks, and also enforce why I give so much importance to it, not just, again, as I mentioned, in the context of VR and AR, but also in a wide range of disciplines. So I did a dual major in archaeology and computer science when I was an undergrad here. And it was really apparent from the beginning that structure was an important way to think about these 2 disciplines. So just to give a brief background, so in archaeology, I have a hunch there are like quite a few archaeologists here, so I need to be careful. But in archaeology, over the last half century, we've seen 2 major train of thoughts, or maybe a transition between 2 major train of thoughts when analyzing and thinking about the past. This is usually taught in archaeology, intro archaeology courses, so like archaeology 1, I don't know if like Andrew Bauer still teaches that, archaeology 1 or like, archaeology 102. And they're categorized as processual and post-processual archaeology, or new archaeology for processionals and other common terms. Now, I'm going to preface, I'm not going to go over the entire history of like archaeology from like environmental determinism all the way to present, because that'll take forever. I know some of you might be excited for that, but unfortunately, that's not the discussion for today. But what I do want to touch on is that processual archaeology emerged in the 1960s as a response to the perceived limitations of traditional archaeology. And so basically, archaeology at the time lacked a lot of scientific approaches that would serve as a basis of maybe why things were the way they were. So essentially, basically there was a lot of emphasis on description, but not a lot of emphasis on like the scientific process. And some people didn't like that. And so the why, or the reason behind different observations, was very important. And so what this one guy, Louis Binford, did, and a couple of other archaeologists, was like, they were like, okay, let's build some structures here to really make archaeology this scientific and systematic discipline. And this led to various types of frameworks that would be used to explain archaeological observations. And some of these include systems thinking, prediction-based framework, scientific method, the shaping of culture through environmental and ecological means, et cetera, et cetera. These frameworks, they allowed archaeologists basically to more systematically understand the processes that shape human behavior and cultural change over time. But obviously, and you get to this in these types of intro classes when talking about new archaeology, is that there are apparent limitations already to this approach, right? Not everything is just explained, especially like in human societies. Not everything is explained by, oh, X equals Y equals Z, or X leads to Y, which equals Z. You can't explain everything in this scientific top-down issue tree, right? While such a framework, it could be useful in thinking of certain archaeological problems, or maybe like more narrower situations, it's not enough by itself because it lacks the individual, the cultural, and the context-specific elements that are always present in human societies. And so, then there came along this guy, Ian Hodder, who said, okay, enough is enough. These ideas are great, they're scientific, they help us as archaeologists, but we really need to build around these frameworks so that we can more effectively tell stories of the past. So the key point I want to drive here, this transition, right, is that processional archaeology, it laid a structural groundwork. It wasn't like completely useless, right? I mean, obviously, when you're doing excavations, if you're doing stratigraphy, there are these issue trees that you probably have to go through. But what really, instead of just kind of disregarding altogether, I think post-processual archaeology, what it did was it used those structured methodologies and data processing tools and just expanded on it and led to more expansive theories. So it took the frameworks and just made archaeology kind of a multidisciplinary approach to kind of tell the stories of people in the past, using the structures, but also using the human agency, the individual context of each situation. So that's one kind of outtake I got. And obviously, cool. One of the things that got me interested in archaeology was like Stonehenge, which I imagine could be exciting for some of you. And so yeah, basically here, traditional archaeology, as I mentioned, it attempts to explain and classify, the stones. That's so with classification, that's like what it was. Then they were like, no, we need to have structure. We need to think about Stonehenge like more scientifically. And, something like that would look like, hey, explaining the mechanisms, for maybe labor, or maybe the roots that were required to build Stonehenge. And then finally, post-processual archaeology took those, but also expanded upon it. Added the human agency and attempted to incorporate the people, the culture, the context, and ultimately created a broader story of the creation of Stonehenge. Now, we don't know Stonehenge is a weird example because I think we don't know 100%. Michael Parker Prusen did some interesting studies, but I digress. I could talk about Stonehenge all day. And so that's in archaeology. But now, I want to go to the second half of my academic background real quick, and that's computer science. And so some of you who have taken any computer, I imagine some of you have had to take like computer science courses here, so you're probably familiar with functions. So a function is a reusable block of code that performs a specific task, allowing the input of different parameters to achieve the same underlying goal. The key element here for a function is obviously one, reusability, but also two, adaptability. So just to illustrate this concrete concept in a very simple manner, we see this create painting function. Very basic, and all it does is like just prints something. And basically, it prints out a sentence describing a painting and its location. So seems straightforward, but you get a very wide-ranging outputs just from this one function, right? In one instance of the parameters for this function, we get a large landscape painting in the Tate Modern, right? And then in another instance, we get a small portrait in the Met. Same function, but just different input parameters, right? And you get a completely different situation. Now, obviously, this is just a statement. It's like text. It doesn't mean anything. This is a simple example, but as you can imagine this function would create like a physical object and place it somewhere in the world. These are two completely different things, right? And so what I really want you to think about and what I encourage you is just understand really how these frameworks in like these basic functions really support the more complex 2D applications, and also to allow for adaptability and allow for change. If it wasn't for these functions, every single situation would require what? A unique set of instructions, right? So, obviously these two by itself, it's completely different, but we could generate the same, or we could generate these two different things using the same function, but different input parameters. So again, just thinking about frameworks and structure in that way. What I want to say is that in both archaeology and in computer science, right, we see that these structured frameworks, they enable higher levels of innovation and expansion into new paradigms within their respective domains. And really what my argument today is that, and going back to XR now, so yeah, enough of archaeology, and well, not enough of computer science, but my argument today is that in a similar fashion, the same applies to this kind of like subdiscipline of computer science, XR, right? In order to build these great, incredible, complex 3D applications in virtual reality and augmented reality and all these disciplines, digital humanities, industry, education, you really need these structured frameworks and lenses to start with. It's not an end-all be-all, of course, but we see in so many disciplines, it all starts with the structured frameworks and then we build off of it, right? And this is especially important when you're considering a very new discipline, right? Less than 10 years, where development has really started to take off. So there are four main reasons why frameworks I feel are attractive and necessary for XR development today in 2025. So one is the immature ecosystem. Two is the recent alignment between XR headsets and user preferences, which Aaron talked about in the intro a little bit. Three is the fragmented developer space. And four is the steep learning curve. So number one, for the immature ecosystem, look, headsets and corresponding suites, they're fairly new. When I started back in like 2021, I didn't even know any of them. And though there's been more investment in headsets in recent years, it's still a relatively new industry. Most applications in this industry of the last decade and a half have also been games. And compare that to mobile apps or websites. The type of applications we see are more widespread. Yeah, there are games, right? But I think, for most of us here, just thinking about using our mobile phones, right? We're not, gaming all the time, maybe when we were young kids, but so much of why an iPhone or why a laptop is important is beyond just the gaming side of it, or maybe the entertainment side, right? There are utility apps, there are things that we do, every day, taking notes, writing, doing our homework, right? Watching videos. And so the breadth of applications are certainly more widespread. So yeah, basically the immature ecosystem is one main reason. Number two, the recent alignment between XR headsets and user preferences. So one of the big knocks of XR, even new headsets like the Vision Pro, the Quest 3, is that they're very unnatural to wear. I don't know if any of you have tried either of them on, but yeah, it's probably, if you have, you probably realize it's hard to kind of get beyond 20 or 30 minutes before you're kind of like, okay, I need to take this thing off, right? Well, new innovations, if you've over winter break or like the last couple of months, right, you've seen, Meta partner with Ray-Bans, they've come out with like more user-friendly glasses. I think Android XR for Google came out, they're looking to create some suites for these smart glasses. So certainly the market, is growing for those more user-friendly headwear. So that's a big factor. Third factor I want to talk about, this actually is, in my opinion, the most important, is this fragmented developer space. What do I mean by fragmented development space? So there's a couple of things. One, there are very little design strategies. When you look at Stanford, right? Any of you have just browsed the computer science course, right? You see such a structured framework for just regular computer science design. You have your 106A, 106B classes, then you have your systems classes, then you have all these different tracks, right, for AI or for human-computer interaction and whatnot. There's so much structure, and there are building blocks for different kind of strategies for most 2D AI applications. But for 3D immersive applications, again, there aren't really too many centralized design kind of schemes that institutions. I'm not just saying Stanford. I'm talking about all over the place. Yeah, there aren't a lot of them, and so if you want to get as a developer learns, you can't just take classes there. There are not enough of them, not yet. And so the community currently consists of individual yet talented developers or freelancers scattered across different disciplines rather than centralized groups or companies aiming to build XR solutions. Yeah, you have your Apples and Metas recently developing some departments to kind of further this, but those are like top companies. The rest of the market really is fragmented here. So many experiences, right? They're built on an application by application basis. So it's really difficult to get any form of standardization when there's a fragmented developer society, right? And certainly this creates high barriers to entry for new creators, right? New creators like you guys or me or whoever would want to build for XR. And then lastly, I just want to focus on the steep learning curve, right? We're going from a 2D space to a 3D space, right? In 2D, you could probably write in GPT, hey, I want a code to do X, Y, Z. But when you're using a headset or like new glasses that were invented last month, how you connect the code to the glasses in the chat, you could try to maybe prompt chat GPT to do it, but it's tough. You have to think about the user experience design. You have to think about the hardware. You have to think about different design principles. Obviously, the new suites that are coming out, and it's a steep learning curve. It's not just a matter of learning one language. So that's my case. Hopefully, I've convinced you all that frameworks are important in XR. If not, we could chat about it later. But once we have these XR frameworks, then we can move into a post-processual, quote unquote, era of XR, where developing different applications across disciplines, ranging from digital humanities to industry to education, be easier and more accessible for new creators. So how do we construct these frameworks for virtual reality? Right, so it turns out, I've been thinking about this for a while. I might have mentioned I've been developing for 3-4 years now. And I've spent that time developing virtual and augmented reality applications, and I would love to share with you some of the design frameworks that I've come up with that are tailored for VR and AR. So yeah, let's jump into it. So these are the 6 frameworks. We'll go through sequential frameworks, solve and test, action and feedback, multimodal interaction, that one is one of my favorites, flexible action and feedback, and then plug and check. So this also will mostly go in chronological order in terms of when I developed. So you will also probably see a progression of graphics and my own skills and XR development through these experiences. And yeah, I encourage you though, while we really think about the idea of like a function in a structure and a framework and how do you use all of these different tools as building blocks for more complex applications, right? And in any of your respective skills, not just archaeology or computer science or digital humanities, but really in any field. So let's jump into it. So number one, sequential framework. So there are 3 experiences kind of that I started off with when I started to develop that I'll show with you today that follow this kind of framework. One is a cistern virtual gallery space themed after Ottoman geographical works. Another one is an extension of that work that focuses on user activities in a cultural context. And then the third is actually not related to any of that, but it's an escape room themed after Harry Potter. So I'm a huge fan of that. So yeah, that would be fun. Just key features that characterize this framework. It's all about flow, one scene to the next. This is a great place to start if you're ever looking to get into XR development. As a developer, I'm not going to talk about too much of the programming, but you can imagine, you're either within a scene, a single scene, or you're maybe moving across scenes. And in a fully immersive XR, when you have the ability to move, in transition, so you can imagine how you might set those transition up if you were developing. And often this is also guided in certain ways, right? Whether it's directly or indirectly. And then I also just want to talk specifically on the benefits of this specific framework before I get into some case studies. Number one, improved user engagement. This is huge, right? We talked about this. It keeps users focused with clear objectives and transitions. 2, scalability, another thing. Think about building blocks. All of these frameworks I'm going to be talking about today, they're all building blocks for expansive applications. So it's very easy to add new segments or additional activities when you have a sequential framework in your app, right? If you want to add another exhibit, right? Maybe there's a new geographical work that you want to add, you could easily kind of add this to the framework. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Adaptability can this be applied to a variety of use cases: education, entertainment, cultural heritage, right? And then data collection. So a cool thing about these sequential frameworks, as a developer or an admin, you could track or whatever data you want to track. Maybe you want to track, students going through an experience. Maybe you want to see what they're spending most time on, what, geographical works are they paying the most attention to. So basically, this is an Ottoman Geographical Works Museum. This was one of the first experiences I built with CESTA. And the features here are distinct rooms, exhibit spaces, and galleries displaying Ottoman geographical content. Very interesting stuff. As you can imagine, I wasn't really focused too much on the design. The design is, if any of you are like UX designers can imagine, this is not the prettiest. However, when we're thinking about the framework, we see what? We see like a room-to-room type of navigation within the scene. Users move through distinct exhibits, rooms, each presenting a specific collection or theme. And then we also might have progress tracking, right? I mentioned this a little bit. Users can follow a curated path through the gallery or explore freely, with the framework ensuring that they visited certain exhibits, right? You can see, you're also keeping track towards the top on the number of exhibits that they visited. And the key takeaways for this that I want to just talk about is, one, the cultural engagement. I think sequential frameworks, for any just kind of basic kind of application, maybe you're an instructor or a professor that just wants to kind of show either 2D or 3D content in a space. I think this ensures that users experience the gallery in a meaningful way and kind of go through it the way you would want them to, right? So if you're a professor and you want your students to engage with content in some linear fashion, you could use a framework like this to just kind of keep adding content as you like. And then obviously scalability is huge with this, and I kind of mentioned that before. But yeah, you could add new rooms, you could add new exhibits, you could add new, content if you want. And so basically this sequential framework in the system gallery space demonstrates how, having this structured navigation, you can transform a virtual gallery into a very immersive and educational journey, right? Obviously the content is what drives this, of course, right? Without the content, this really means nothing. And I think for a lot of these experiences, that's the case. But as a developer, the framework is very useful. So next, there's a lot here, but this was an extension I did the following summer, actually, at the in part with the University of Toronto. That was called GeoCister, and this basically it takes this idea of galleries, but also like gamifies it in an environment still pertaining to Ottoman styles. So at the time we were looking at, okay, maybe how do we incorporate drawing exercises or like maybe creative engagement, like map making and cartography and maybe even meditation into like this Ottoman space, right? Let's make, it's great to like learn about content and whatnot, but it's another thing to maybe gamify it, make it more engaging, especially for like students or for, anyone who might be interested. And, really here you continue to see room-to-room navigation, but also you hear audio and visual sequencing. I don't think I incorporated the audio, but believe me, like those bottom two kind of experiences, basically they have a lot of like kind of natural sounds, and they have prompts that basically prompt the user or the student or whoever's going through it to kind of think of certain things as they hear. And so I think audio and visual sequencing is a huge part of like XR that's actually very underused, not just in these situations, just as a whole. We think about space and we think about movement, but we don't really think about audio too much. So I encourage you to also think about those things as well. And so immersive learning, user engagement, obviously scalability is another big takeaway from this type of like sequential framework as well. But yeah, really here you could see it's not just about the space, but it's also the activities that you do, right? The map making, the meditating, or, whatnot. And so even in a 3D space, you could utilize 2D content in creative ways, especially, if you're just starting out. And then the last kind of sequential framework I want to discuss here is this escape room. So this is not Ottoman related, but when I was a part of the virtual human interaction lab, we had the opportunity to build like a fun little game that suited our kind of needs at the time. At the time, I think I was like watching a Harry Potter, like in December, like they used to have like runs, and I think I made this during December. So anyway, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I don't know why this is not loading. Oh, there, okay. It's a Wi-Fi issue. But basically, what we have here is an immersive VR experience inspired by the Wizarding World universe, where users solve puzzles by collecting the correct objects to escape the room. In the Harry Potter franchise, basically just brief overview, there are like 3 things called the Deathly Hallows. Basically, the objective is to collect the 3 without running into obstacles, otherwise you have to start over, as you probably just saw. And so the purpose is that, obviously this is an escape room, but what I really encourage you guys to think about is it's all about engagement in a gamified problem-solving manner, right? And I think through kind of simple experiences like this, collecting objects or having clear objectives, you could really start to tell stories and have like users really engage in those stories at the same time in an immersive experience. And so, of course, an escape room is obviously a prime example of that, but I can imagine there are a lot of opportunities to do that in a lot of different disciplines. And going. Yeah, you didn't see that. So how is it applied? So we have the room-to-room kind of navigation, but in an escape room, it's a little bit different, right? Like in this scene specific, you're within the same scene, you're just kind of moving to the other side of like this web threshold that's over there. So as I mentioned, you have both the room-to-room transitions, but you have inter-room transitions as well. So when you're creating your spaces, it's important to think about that. I think, again, the activity, how is the progression kind of characterizing this as opposed to the others? So in the others, it was going from room to room directly. Here, that progression is not necessarily room to room, but maybe collection after collection, right? Or objective after objective. In this case, objective is collecting an item. You have to choose between 2 every time, as you can probably see. And then, the progress tracking, again, as an admin, how are you kind of collecting this data and what are you tracking? Maybe you're tracking what mistakes they make, and you could collect that by just, kind of every time there's some type of trigger or collision, you're collecting that data. What is the user collecting? What is the user maybe interacting with? So you have all of these qualitative and quantitative measurements that you could use for your studies. I think this is just another prime example of why sequential frameworks, though very simple, are very useful. And I just, again, want to highlight the idea of storytelling as a great way of using these sequential frameworks. Okay, so next framework we have here is the solve and test framework. So basically, problem solving. So the key feature here is problem solving. This is when there's like a right answer or a wrong answer. I know sometimes in the humanities, this may not be always the case, but sometimes when people are practicing math or maybe doing science, this might be a very cool framework to use and develop, especially if you want to emphasize visual learning. And the cool thing here is also, this idea of parameters. Again, I told you guys about functions and thinking about functions. So, users, they can tweak input variables or numbers and observe how changes affect their outcomes, facilitating deeper understanding visually. And we also see that, in a solve and test framework, which I'll show you an example of, you could use different types of interactive tools within an immersive environment, like whiteboards or other types of simulations to help brainstorm, calculate, and test solutions. And yeah, again, this kind of framework is highly geared towards the math and the sciences. However, you can make a case that this can also be very useful in other types of maybe situations where there isn't just a right answer all the time. And this will make more sense when I show you the example. But really, the benefit, again, I want to just go over the benefits real quick. 2 main benefits: enhanced learning and problem solving. So with enhanced learning, basically, you get visual representation. This is huge. When I was studying math growing up, it's all about visual. How is this number changing going to affect maybe the height of the projectile or the speed of the car, whatever. When you could see that, it changes the game so much. And then also hands-on problem solving, right? You have to learn by doing, by experimenting, by trial and error. Sometimes it's easy to do that in scientific settings if you have experiments, but on a pen and paper, oftentimes it may not be as easy. And then on the other side, iterative for problem solving, again, experimentation and immediate feedback. Again, something that is not always the case in real life because you have to maybe set things up, but obviously in VR, you don't have to worry about that. Not always. So this was a environment for solving kinematics problems and understanding the real world implications. Basically, launching projectiles by calculating the velocity and the angles that you had to kind of launch them at in order to hit a certain target. So basically, you have like a target on the wall, you just want to hit it. So the users here would have to calculate how to hit that by, how much force or velocity to set the projectile at. Key features here, obviously, and I mentioned some of these, the problem-solving workflow, the visual testing of solutions, obviously the parameter adjustment to explore how variable changes affect the outcomes of the projectiles. The cool thing is the interactive tools like the whiteboard, right? Having a virtual whiteboard and actually drawing things out. I was kind of struggling there, and my handwriting wasn't the prettiest. But trust me, I was doing actual math, or I think I was doing actual math. And this is ideal for STEM education. I think. Let's play this again. Focus on concepts that have a clear, maybe right or wrong answer, especially when you're teaching kids, math or simple equations. I think this is a great framework to kind of use and apply. And so, yeah, basically the key takeaways that I want to, talk about here is one is hands-on learning and also this idea of iteration, because I think that's important, right? If you get an answer wrong, you could just automatically reset. Maybe you could have some feedback. And with feedback, I think it brings us to our next point. Yes, action and feedback framework. So basically, for this framework, we have inputs. And inputs can include speech, gestures, positional data, or any other type of interaction that a user is having within a space, in a 3D space. And we have real-time feedback mechanisms as well. This can be visual cues, audio prompts, system interactions. Obviously, with the use of Gen AI, you can have AI systems interpret a lot of these inputs and deliver contextual responses or instructions. And yeah, this is highly dynamic. Quickly on the benefits for this, again, especially when you're incorporating Gen AI, you have these very tailored and personalized experiences. And you have a lot of versatility of what you can do in terms of the use cases and the adaptability of this type of framework. So basically this is a VR theater in performance. If any of you are theater kids, I was growing up, you might be interested in this. I certainly was, because usually people don't use theater and VR in any sort of combination. But I thought this was an opportunity for me to really delve in. You might hear, hopefully, okay, good. You're not gonna hear my voice really loud. Maybe you will. But basically the point here that I want to make is that in theater, right? What are you doing? You're speaking your lines. You're moving around stage, and you might have a director that's criticizing you. I'm just gonna lower this. Or you might have a director that's kind of telling you, okay, maybe you have this line wrong, or maybe you have the line right, but you're in the wrong position on the stage, right? So you have all of these kind of spatial interactions that you're doing. But when you're practicing maybe at home, in your room or maybe alone, you don't have that director. You don't have maybe someone who could guide you to give immediate feedback right in front of your face. So, something. So basically, in this type of framework, what you could do, leverage a Gen AI framework to act as a director agent and then give feedback based on the spatial data that's gathering from what you're saying and where you are on a stage. So obviously, again, this works great in a theater and performance, but I encourage you to think about other types of applications where this might be useful. And the key takeaway here is just the personalized guidance that you can get in virtual reality. And I think this is huge, especially with more AI interaction. I think this would be, this is a huge thing. And other applications, I think, in this space include maybe interview practice, right? A lot of people, when you're applying to jobs or internships, right? This, having some type of behavioral interview assistant or feedback mechanism would be great. Also, if you're in debate, something like that, that's like another big application, and the admin can tailor the agent to kind of interact with you in ways that are not just kind of generic. If you want an agent to be a little bit more aggressive and really challenge you, you could set that up as an admin. So there's a lot of flexibility with this type of framework, and I think this is actually a really cool use case for that. So quickly, just going through some of the last ones, multimodal interaction. We kind of touched on that a little bit, but this one is a little bit more geared towards the idea of moving objects around a space using those like three main levers: gaze, gesture, and voice interaction. And yeah, the main benefits here is that you have more intuitive user interactions. Number one, natural input methods like gaze, speech, and gestures reduce complexity, make XR experiences more user friendly, right? So if I'm telling Aaron, hey Aaron, move my food in the garbage, right? He knows what I mean. He knows where the food is. He knows where the garbage is. But if you're telling maybe a system, maybe a computer to do that, how is the computer going to know where your food is in the space? Maybe there are other people's food as well. We don't want to throw everyone's food out, although most of you are done. And so what this idea, and where's the garbage can? Like Aaron knows where it is, but the computer may not know. So what we do is we leverage all three modalities of gaze, of voice, of gesture, of where your eyes are at, and we take information through the virtual environment so that those seemingly natural kind of phrases and expressions are actually also natural in VR, right? In VR, you'd have to be, take my food, which is at position 0, -1, and move it to the garbage can, which is like it's position 20. That's ridiculous. I mean, like, what are we doing there? And so this idea of multimodal interaction just kind of fixes that. And then it's just, it also helps with like error reduction and a lot of like spatial calculations also, which is like more accurate when you apply multimodal interaction. So that's like another kind of on the developer side, much more user friendly. And so the use cases here are actually not too exciting. It's just it's basically moving. I've just moved around a chair and maybe changed its color. However, you can imagine. You can imagine, right, like this idea of this like natural way of kind of moving objects within a space, through just through commands that are more natural, is a great way to kind of just make user experiences more friendly in VR and actually increase the adoptability of a lot of frameworks, right? Nobody wants to be asking the highly specific commands in order to do or conduct actions in VR. And certainly multimodal interaction is moving away from that. So yeah. So quickly going through. So 5, this is like an advancement of the previous feedback action and feedback system. So basically this tailors user interactions based on a predefined context scenario. And jumping straight into the application here, I think this is actually one where it will make more sense. Let's see. So this is a language learning, contextual language learning. This is fun. Again, you might hear a little my voice, but as you can imagine, in an immersive space, language learning. This is a language learning environment that uses generative AI to offer tailored conversational practice and real-time feedback, helping users develop fluency and confidence in context-specific scenarios. So basically, you could see you're in an immersive environment, a skybox that's resembling Paris, France. So if you're learning French, that's obviously a great place to start. But then how do you kind of really improve your kind of skills in terms of maybe you need to work on certain types of vocabulary, certain types of phrases, right? So this is where you could leverage Gen AI. So bringing that Gen AI framework back in, you could have an admin set up conversational prompts and that are tailored towards your specific needs, or you could choose them yourselves as well. And so these customizable parameters, basically, that instructions or admins can set up and configure, they basically set up focus areas that target specific vocabulary, idiomatic expressions, and conversational topics to really improve and target individuals' language skills and really helps them improve, essentially. And, you know, again, this idea of instant feedback on pronunciation, vocabulary, and conversational flow, it really helps people refine their skills. And so, yeah, again, just thinking about the other applications that could come out of this, right? We talked about, you know, interview practice. We talked about, you know, maybe mock debates, enhancing just communication skills, right? There's some people have anxiety, right? And, you know, that's very common and natural. You know, it might be difficult to just, you know, put yourself out there all the time. I certainly sometimes have that problem. And so, you know, maybe providing a framework that could help with that and also allow you to target what you specifically need in order to improve your communication. That's certainly super helpful for a lot of people. And that's something that this framework could do. And so lastly, kind of to sum it all up, really, this framework is called a plug and chug. And I like this because it really embodies what a function is. And we started this conversation, you know, really talking about what a function does and why, you know, it's such an important framework. And basically, you know, a framework accepts predefined inputs, data sets, configurations, pictures, whatever assets you have, and it produces a consistent and repeatable output. That's basically a definition of a function. And that's basically what you could also do maybe in a 3D space if you think more three-dimensionally. And just to go over like a case study of this past summer, I built a virtual reality map application with in partnership with the David Rumsey Map Center, specifically kind of exploring the historical and modern Paris landscape. And, you know, there's a lot of complex like georeference maps and maybe points of interest and obviously descriptive information, right, that you can imagine. Obviously also images, right, in an immersive gallery space as well. That was a cool feature that we implemented. But the cool thing about a framework like this is because you could think of this whole kind of map experience as just one function. It's a function in 3D. If you ever wanted to, you know, take another map, maybe you didn't like Paris so much, right? Didn't get to go to the Olympics. It'll be in LA. It'll be in LA in 2028. So if you want to do a similar map of LA, all an admin needs to do is, you know, get a map of LA, input those that as one of the parameters, maybe get some point of interest, get some coordinates and images, place that into maybe some sort of framework that the developer has set up, and then bam, you have the same exact experience. You have the same exact experience, but just for a different map. So that'll be my summer project for 2028, I guess. But really, yeah, I really want to highlight that idea of a function and how you can just plug and chug different parameters. And I think this is super helpful for a lot of people in industry, right, that might be working in certain contexts where, you know, they just want to set up a framework for a lot of like reproducible content. So with that said, that kind of concludes my analysis on all the 6 frameworks that I've used over the years. Now, I did promise that these last 3 categories are super quick, so I'm just going to really fly through them. I know Aaron's probably telling me speed up. And so basically, building blocks. I mentioned this briefly, and what I really want to stress is that each framework provides a specific structure or methodology for creating XR experiences. And these are all modular building blocks, right? So you can add different combinations to get, you know, different results, right? So we talked about like museum kind of applications. Well, you could integrate that with some of the more, you know, action and feedback frameworks and get like some guided museum tours that integrate, you know, real-time AI, you know, to maybe help inform you about certain artifacts. So, you know, you can imagine, you know, what else you might be able to do in those contexts. And, you know, so on and so forth with, you know, different combinations that you have here. So these are not just frameworks by themselves, but, you know, you could add multiple frameworks together to create really dynamic experiences. And then, you know, I think, you know, 3 main things I would highly encourage you all to think about is that, you know, while frameworks are important, I think there are 3 like broader kind of trends here for the future of XR, and that's user-centered design, multimodal interaction, which was actually one of the frameworks, and Gen AI usage. These 3 things I think are really going to shape the XR industry in the future. With user-centered design, the headwear, the software suites, as those, you know, maybe improve user experience, you know, people are going to really start to focus on, hey, how do we make these like experiences more user-friendly, more relatable, more natural? Right, the hardware is good. People love the Meta glasses. or developers are getting more comfortable with the software suites. Now the user design principles, they're going to start to become way more important than just, hey, creating an experience that does X, Y, Z. Next, multimodal interactions, speaking about natural natural ways of interacting with the 3D environment. That's going to be absolutely paramount. And then finally, Gen AI. I mean, LLMs, as you can imagine, and various APIs that you could use, they're cornerstone for these scalable, personalized XR experiences. When you talk about things like performance or theater or debates or virtual kind of interview practice, Gen AI is a huge part to play in that, and there could be a lot of positive ways where there could be a lot of positive impacts in that regard. And then finally, yeah, I just want to say structured frameworks are important for the development of XR. That was my argument today. And I think they'll have a huge impact in digital humanities, in industry, and in education, because number one, they increase scalability. A lot of those benefits, right? At the ends of those issue trees, we saw scalability as a huge factor and a huge benefit of using said framework. Two, I think very importantly, they build collaborative XR developer communities across disciplines. I think the goal for me, for a lot of developers in general, is just to ensure that this community is not fragmented forever, and that it does somehow become unified in a way. And I think these frameworks are a great way to start. And then finally, I think just decreasing the barriers to entry for new XR entrants. I remember how difficult it was to just set up Unity, for the first time. And I think these frameworks, along with just time and better suites, better headsets, I think they're gonna really encourage a lot of people to get into this space and really have beneficial XR experiences in all these disciplines. So with that said, thank you all for listening. Appreciate all of the time. And yeah, I hope this was interesting. And please, if you do have any questions, I would be very happy to answer, or just any comments. I would love to chat about any of this stuff, as well as any archaeology stuff. I don't know, I just feel there are a lot of archaeologists today, but thank you all.
I was kind of curious about what you were saying, plug and chug in the future. And I guess there's like a greater reliance on like AI to make things personalized, but how much do you feel like that takes away from like a kind of conscious kind of thing where the kind of creator is kind of personalizing the experience in a very conscious way, as opposed to kind of AI creating that personalization?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. To address your first point, like the whole idea behind plug and chug, yes, is like, I think it's more, honestly, that framework and like that kind of building strategy is more for the developers. I feel where it's very beneficial for developers, just because if they want to maybe, have a different type of content be displayed for the user, it's a very easy way to kind of adjust that. But no, I totally understand what you're saying, right? When you think about that from the user perspective, right? I think you do certainly have to be careful, because I think sometimes with AI, whether it's through maybe like feedback you're getting verbally, or through text, or even if it's like some type of image feedback, it is sometimes a black box. The ad, what I've done, I also work actually currently in the AI and policy space, and what we're really looking at there is like, how do you build kind of like these admin dashboards where you really can, as much as you can, control what the AI is displaying to the user. So say, the user, really wants a certain type of feedback, or really is interested in a certain type of thing, not having the AI be an assistant to guide the user or whoever through that experience, through that lens, but not veer too often to its own biases. And so there's a lot of work, I think, being done in the 2D applications that could eventually translate. But yeah, I think the key for AI is really helping developers kind of just make their lives easier to develop kind of these frameworks that can interact in more dynamic ways, really. So.
A lot of the things we're discussing seem to have a pedagogical sort of bent to them, or yeah, I was curious actually with like photogrammetry, and there was another word that was in my mind, but immediately lost it because I started talking, such is the way. But I was wondering if, like, on the research end of things, you also foresee this being potentially useful, like in speculative reconstructions and those things. And if any specific framework you would think is particularly useful, I know of a few sites where they're doing sort of a digital archaeology, recording, various layers, and then looking at it again in post to help with the interpretive process. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on like sort of streamlining that. Everything seems to be, if a dig has the money to do it on their own, they're doing it on their own. There doesn't seem to be a broader sort of infrastructure for that sort of thing.
No, 100%. I think, yeah, I worked on a few photogrammetry projects myself, and I was like, when I first say, I'm like, it's a process, right? You have to scan the whole thing and write. Obviously, if you want a very high level of detail, it's a lot of time, a lot of cost. And yeah, not only if you have the funding, you might be able to get a site or an excavation. And even for you could talk about like shipwrecks, right? Because like the archaeology center here, I think, has some research being done in like Sicily. So you can imagine, trying to do that would be difficult. I think you bring up a good point on like what the other side of Gen AI. I talked a lot about like LLMs and maybe like kind of more textual like generative AI, but obviously there's the whole 3D segment at the moment. And I think there's starting to be like frameworks where you could kind of generate and like estimate what kind of there has been research on like taking 2D images like of like a certain like object or scene and kind of converting that into a 3D image, like when you use like these complex fusion models. Basically they're basically like a tool to kind of generate 3D objects. At the moment though, I don't foresee them to be kind of in this space anytime soon. I mean, if they are, it's going to be kind of a similar thing to photogrammetry, where sure it'll be an available tool, but it'll be very expensive.
Yeah.
But I think 5-10 years from now, I mean, you're going to see a lot of like 3D generative AI in virtual reality for sure. Because I think especially the hardest part is really the environment. A lot of these experience, I think up front, a lot of the objects and the aesthetic was nice, but it's really the other stuff, like the surrounding environment, that's the hard part, but that's what makes it realistic. That's what's going to really engage and like have a lot of users actually come to these experiences and actually feel like, okay, this is something useful. It's kind of hard to take a lot of this stuff seriously when, the 3D objects or the 3D environments are not at that level. So I think that is certainly a limitation, but it's a good point. I think in the near future, there might be more opportunities for sure.
Thank you.
Any